for adoption the draft Triennial Agreement, which was first discussed by you on at your meeting on the 25th of January. It's a requirement of the Local Government Act to have a formal agreement between the regional council in a region and its constituent territorial authorities, including, in our case, both the four primary territorial authorities, Wairoa, Central Hawke's Bay, Hastings and Napier, as well as the two non-primary parties being Rangitikei and Taupo, which have small parts of their districts within our region. So at the 25th of January meeting, there was a draft put in front of you, and it was resolved that the chairman would meet with the mayors of all the parties to work through any changes that were required to be made from the 2013 document. That subsequently took place in two stages. The first was a meeting both face-to-face and via conference call of staff from the 7 local authorities, and some changes were made there or proposed there. They were subsequently put by Councillor Graham to his colleagues via a conference call last week. Some more changes were made and discussions held, and subsequently the version of the agreement that was attached to your paper is the one that was agreed to by them. Earlier on this week, a request was made to include really, I guess, some points that came out from the 25th of January meeting, which I unfortunately was unavailable and which I was unaware of, and these are put up on the screen for you now. Mrs. Hooper's put them up there for you. So they were one additional principle, an additional bullet point under general approach to communication and coordination. As part of our requirement to have agreement by all the parties, I then emailed the other 6 councils and asked for their comments on those 2 proposed additions. Last night I circulated to you, or yesterday afternoon, the feedback from them. Broadly speaking, the comments really say this. In the first instance, the additional principle, the comments generally reflect a question as to why that is needed, as it is a requirement in any event under the Resource Management Act. And secondly, under the one for general approach to communication and coordination, there was general acceptance that there could be a need for this type of committee, but clarification was sought around whether or not that would be a staff committee or one that had elected representatives on it. In general, there was little concern if it was a staff-led committee, but certainly the indications are that there wouldn't necessarily be agreement to there being either a elected representatives committee or a mix of the two. So from my perspective, you've really there's a couple of options. I think we are the first of the councils to debate this formally, but it has to be signed by the 1st of March. And the feedback that I've also had, which I've included in the emails, is that it's suggested that the agreement be adopted as it was issued last Thursday via the council agenda, and as it's being issued and has been issued by other councils who are debating it this afternoon and tomorrow, for example, and then asking the mayoral forum to look specifically at amending it or reviewing it to include either these 2 clauses as they're written there, or one or the other, or something similar to that reflects their intent. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right. Liz, now any questions?
Mr. Chairman, perhaps directed at Councillor Curtin. Forgive me, but I still don't quite understand what the problem is that is being attempted to be solved, other than obviously the issue of Havelock North Water. But I would have thought that in regard to that, it would be prudent to await the findings of the Commission of Inquiry as to what recommendations they may have for council's governance.
Councillor Curtin.
Well, if I can respond, Mr Chair, to Councillor Dick, the issue I raise, yes, does include the surrounds of the Havelock North Water scenario and that particular resource consent as one of multiple numbers of resource consent processes that clearly across the region have not been successful and in fact have been significant failures. So we've got Central Hawke's Bay, wastewater is one, the biggest and most catastrophic is Havelock North. The next, and I say is a catastrophic scenario, is the Ahuriri Estuary and the water consents from Napier City. We've got similar scenarios in Wairoa, particularly the Waihi Dam, and what I'm suggesting to this council and to our colleagues who are right across the board is that we have a system currently that is manifestly failing, that there is a disconnect between what is happening at a staff level in consideration and dialogue around consents, and that's manifestly demonstrated in evidence in the inquiry. And I'm saying we cannot continue with that sort of communication regime which doesn't work. The thing that I'm seeing as being critical to this, and this is confirmed by conversations with the elected representatives from a number of councils, is that they know nothing about it. They know nothing about the dialogue and discussions that take place around key, and I'm not saying every resource consent, but the key resource consents that impact on the council and their council and this council. So I'm saying let's open a dialogue on a regular basis. It can be a quarterly meeting that tables the top 10 resource consents that impact in a particular local authority area that we are signing off on. I had a comment from the Mayor of Central Hawke's Bay last night, particularly around this, when we signed off a resource consent and their council knew nothing about it and were astounded by it and wanted to have some input and dialogue around it. So I'm saying that we need a regime change in terms of the way we approach this, and I say let's have a top-to-bottom approach where the elected representative from this council and that particular local authority sits down on a regular basis and said, well, here are those issues. So it brings everyone into play on it. And I just think that it's a vital next step to get a great deal of integrity into our resource management approach.
I have a question that now that I'm, along with Councillor Bailey, embarked on making good decisions program and doing RMA things, I've got a bit more clarity on this. The thing that strikes me particularly, and this is my question, is about the separation of powers, that the resource consent process, the planning process, the resource consent process particularly, is almost a judicial or semi-judicial process. It's about making decisions on the law, and you're there in a judicial capacity. If you are going to be talking as a councillor, you're talking in a political capacity. And my concern here is that are we seeking to blur the politics of a council meeting with the judicial, semi-judicial process of making legal decisions on the RMA? And so what I've heard so far, doesn't give me the confidence that we have quite separated these things out. So I just want people to be clear about that. I want to be clear on that. I think this is the point that Liz is making differently. When she said concerns would be that if it was about councillors, it would be different if it was from staff. But I don't think that's the split. I think what it is, I think the concern, I've more accurately described the concern.
Yeah, I think through you, Mr. Chair, you have. My concern is purely around the regulatory process and the perception of political interference potentially in it. But having listened to Councillor Curtin's explanation now, I'm wondering if there's another way through this that may meet may address his concerns. And it came about when it was suggested that the local Hawke's Bay Regional Councillor from each area meet with their respective councillors. I think one of the main concerns that's come back reflects the fact that, sorry, it's gone again, talking about resource consent management committees, and that immediately gets into, well, the management side of the council business. But perhaps there's a more broad liaison role between the local constituency councillors and the local councils that could address not only those particular issues at a meeting, but wider issues for a district or a constituency, and potentially if that's perhaps staged, you have the mayoral forum, which we already have set out in there, and then something along the lines of, and in addition to that, there will be more formal engagement between, for example, Councillor Hewitt and the Central Hawke's Bay District Council, or Councillor Wilson and the Wairoa District Council, or Councillor Curtin and co, and the Napier City, and that provides a platform for the discussions that Councillor Curtin has raised, or the issues that he's raised, to be discussed without them being perceived as being directly or potentially clashing with the regulatory framework.
Can I just come back to, I'm sorry, we're making this on the, but I do think Councillor Curtin has some real meaty points here, but we just got to manoeuvre it. So I just wanted to say to you, ask Councillor Curtin, what do you think a response to the suggestions made by Liz?
Well, I want to dispel any notion that this forum that I'm anticipating has any decision-making capacity or resource consent decision-making ability. It's simply not about that. It's about considering the impacts of that from a policy perspective, that there is full awareness of them. I mean, for example, today in our agenda, we've got the resource consent schedule of those applications coming to council. So we're aware of them. They're in front of us. That's not this council as a whole making a decision about that. They'll be left to mostly to staff in those situations, I understand, the delegated authority. So we're not impinging on the delegated authority or the management of those consents. We have received them, so we're informed about them and we can inquire about them. Similarly, if we had a schedule of those consents relevant to a particular local authority, then similar questions could be asked by the authority, by our colleagues in that situation, also to ask questions about the monitoring and compliance against them. So it's a forum for discussion and policy development and input of the elected representatives around this issue. It's, if you like, it's a double bind or a double consideration of those issues for better governance.
Ping pong. Liz, what do you say to that? Because I think Councillor Curtin has refined it a bit clearer again. We're getting to this.
Yes, I agree. And I think that I go back to my point that I think that there can actually be a broader kaupapa for those meetings, which would include the issues that you've raised, Councillor, that I think would be welcomed in most cases by the parties that we're speaking. Well, the primary parties we would be speaking with. I don't necessarily see the need to go to all six, and this may be, a way through that. And I'm just looking now at the actually at page 18 of your agenda. Sorry, page 19 of your agenda. And I'm wondering if, perhaps after number 3, where it says where the heading is further to this existing cooperation, parties to this agreement will. I'm wondering if after number 3, agree to establish regular liaison meetings between the HBRC constituency councillor and each primary or councillors and each primary local authority, and that would provide the opportunity for all of those issues to be raised.
I think that's probably the initial intent of it in any event,
I think it's quite
Mr. Chairman. Yes, it is.
I think it's a really good suggestion. So we've now got to a sort of what seemed unlikely a meeting of minds here.
You'll find through.
So, I just think you can just see that, for example, CHB Councillor Hewitt meeting with the local councillors down there would be discussing things that she was knowledgeable of, they were knowledgeable of, whereas we were at a meeting and we're talking about things in Wairau we might not be so knowledgeable of. I just think that's a really good refinement. Yeah. So are you happy to amend your resolution accordingly?
Well, there's no resolution at
Well,
present,
you
but
will
yes,
continue to make one.
I'm happy to move the councillors, Ms Lambert's suggested wording as a resolution for inclusion in it.
We'll have that as a notice. I want to have any more questions before we do it, because we have that. Councillor Belford.
Just as a minor procedure that might help, particularly in the area of consents, in the last week, a sign went up at the Wimarama end of the Red Bridge that said "Coffee Shop Coming," a big sign on the property there. And all of a sudden I got a whole flurry of emails and calls from folks on that side of the bridge who were saying basically, what the hell's this all about? And I simply sent an email to Mark Clues and said, what's this all about? And found that there was a non-notified decision made and it was a retail facility was permitted if blah, 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 blah. In the scheme of things, not a really big deal, but controversial nonetheless out where I am. And it would have been helpful, just as we get a report, as you've noted, of every consent that's coming into our council. I don't know whether the other councils do that or not, make that a matter of public record, but it would be good as a uniform policy if they all did. We at least provide one basis for those who are interested to keep tabs on what's going on that might be of interest to them, just from a purely informational standpoint, but also perhaps avoiding some contretemps as matters progressed. So it's not a case, I have no interest in intervening in the Hastings Council's decision-making process, but I'd like to be able to serve my constituents as well.
Could I just say the most remarkable thing about that is that we now see what the status of anxiety is in the Tukituki Valley. and you can see this is the burning issue, a real first world problem, a coffee shop.
Now that the river sticks, moving on to the event.
I just think suggestions that staff can take up. We've got some questions. Councillor Hewitt.
Thank you. I think we've landed at a good spot. I'm interested in the process from here, Liz, and I understand that some of the councils are debating this today and tomorrow, so potentially we're all debating different papers, and how are you going to pull this together by the statutory deadline?
I think that's so. Every other council has the paper that you had attached in front of you. If the resolution is passed with the new number 4, as I've suggested, I will leave the meeting as soon as you've passed it and email the others, because they're all aware that this is being discussed this morning. As I said, that we are the first ones to discuss it, and I will have it out to them by 10 o'clock so that they can put in front of their councillors, and my view is there's unlikely to be any objection to that.
Yeah, just on this is a separate matter. I note in the minutes from our last meeting, the matter of the Joint Hazards Committee was raised as something that should be added into this agreement under number 4 on page 18, did that also fall off the table?
Councillor Bevan, to be fair, I think probably has, and just reflects that I didn't communicate accurately enough with Liz in the interim.
So is it too late to raise that
No.
matter as well?
No, it's probably not.
No, that's-
It's not.
no, that's
It's
fine.
non-controversial,
Yeah.
but it should be there.
Should be the.
So could you just sort of clarify exactly the wording that you would like, councillor, please? So it's just under key priorities
Yeah, it's-
within existing
It's just another dot point there.
include
Yep.
coastal,
Hazards Committee.
thank you.
Could I suggest that we make that part of the resolution so it's clear?
Yep.
Okay, so could I take a resolution from Councillor Curtin, who's going to move the recommendation with two amendments, the one for the committee and the one for the hazards? Are you okay with that, Leanne? It's all right? Okay, Councillor Curtin.
Well, I would comment, I think we've arrived at a reasonable place, and I hope councillors can appreciate the intent here. We may end up not putting, as a part of the principles, a specific issue around resource consent, but nevertheless we've put on the radar to our colleagues and other councils that we do need a regime shift in the way we approach consenting and related issues. There's another matter in regard to this particular process that I think we need to sharpen up on internally, is that our relationships, and it's part of the same side of the coin, is that our local authority colleagues are key stakeholders with us. There's no getting around that. And what really worries me is the message that has come out of the inquiry, the Havelock North inquiry. The message I got from the various responses to even this issue to Miss Lambert coming back from other councils, there had been no communication between those council staff and their elected representatives when the agreement clearly was in the ballpark of those representatives. So what it tells to me is that we've got a substantial cultural problem in Hawke's Bay in relationships between respective councils, and I'm suggesting that we need to take a completely new proactive approach to this and break down those barriers. To give you the example of what I think ought to have taken place in this situation is that letters outlining some of the issues arising out of the 25th of January meeting were outlined in letters to not only the leaders of those councils, but to each councillor, so that we're engaging across the board with all of our local authorities. And I think that's the missing piece we've got to do something substantial about. And hopefully this committee can be the one that potentially could form out of this. A forum of that nature can help that. But nevertheless, aside from that, we do need to reshape our relationships and focus on that from a staff and an elected representative's perspective.
I would need a seconder. Councillor Bailey.
Sorry, Chair, I'm unable to second it because I can't actually recall what the wording of the motion was.
We need an actual
A resolution, what the actual wording of it is?
Recommendation, as you've got on the paper there, with an amendment which was to add in the words that.
What are the words?
Sorry. Agree to establish regular liaison meetings between the relevant HBRC councillors and the local primary party, which would be the local TA. Yeah.
Clearly read out before, and the second amendment was to pick up the point that Councillor Bevan made about the Coastal Hazards Committee, and you bullet point into them. I thought it was pretty clear. So are you okay with that?
I'm happy with it. I'm happy to.
Joint Committee on Coastal Hazards. Now, are you prepared to second?
I'm prepared to second that, yes.
Okay. Sorry?
It gives me another chance to do another speech, mate.
No, you're done. No, you're done. Let me tell you that. You're going to struggle to get a right of reply at this rate. Councillor Balfour.